be out there and they can listen to my voice for 30 or 45 minutes in the comfort of their own home. All right, we're going? All right, welcome to the Vegetable Gardening Seminar. We're glad that you're here today on this gorgeous day. It's a wonderful day for planting vegetable gardens. My name's Joey. I'm one of the owners here at Kirby's Nursery. And we're excited that you're here. There are lots of other seminars and events planned for the season. Our next seminar is on container gardening, planting up beautiful gardens in beautiful pottery. That's going to be on March the 16th. And then our other events are available on our website at kirbysnursery.com. And you can also get reminders of our seminars and workshops if you're signed up for our email newsletter. You'll also get more stories about my chickens and my little girls that you probably care to, but I like them. And some people tell me they enjoy them, so that's a good sign, right? So welcome. We're going to talk about vegetable gardens today, and it already sounds like we've got a mix of people who have done them before and not done them. Who's an absolute first time, never had a vegetable garden? Anybody? Okay, very good. Not too many. But we also had some people that raised their hands and said, I've been unsuccessful in my garden. So we're going to work really hard to help you figure out what you're doing wrong, maybe, and what you could do right to make sure that your vegetable gardens grow really well. So I always like to start the workshop off with a quote to kind of maybe change your thinking just a little bit about what you're supposed to learn today. And the quote is, it's a modification from education, but a gardener doesn't grow a plant, but creates the conditions for plants to thrive. And so what we're going to talk about a lot here isn't the plants specifically. We need to pick those out and pick the right ones. But we aren't really growing the plants. They do that for us. But we've got to create the conditions for them to grow in. And so that's most of what we're going to talk about, is just creating those conditions in our yards to make sure that our vegetable plants can grow really well. So the first thing we need to do is we need to pick the right location for our vegetable garden. Veggies won't grow if they're in the wrong spot. So quick poll, how many people think vegetables should grow in the sun? I'm just showing you should raise your hand. I'm not giving you the answer. How many think they should grow in a shady area? Nobody's brave enough to raise their hand. So shade will not grow vegetables. If you're going to grow a vegetable garden, it's got to be in some sun. We'll call it, full sun in Florida is going to be 6 or more hours per day. So whatever location you pick, it's got to have at least 6 hours of direct sunlight each day for those veggies to grow well. Anything less than that, and they'll struggle, especially if they're fruiting vegetables, so your peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, something that produces kind of the vegetables that you would pick, as opposed to leafy plants, are going to really struggle in shady areas. So that first and foremost, you got to pick the right spot. If you live under 20 oak trees, vegetable gardening just might not be for you. If you are lower on the sun, if it's below 6 hours, you can get away with some things. That's going to be more of the leafy type vegetables, spinaches, lettuces, collards, kale, and things like that. So you can get away with those a little bit more. And of course you can experiment and see what happens. Sometimes tomatoes will do okay, sometimes peppers will do okay if there's too much shade. But usually they need enough sun to really produce well. So make sure you pick a spot that has at least 6 hours of good direct sunlight. Pick the location near an easy water source, an easy, convenient water source. What do you think, I'll spoil this from later, what do you think the #1 problem with all plants is? I heard water, but not overwatering, underwatering. If you call us and say, hey, I have a plant, it's not doing well, what do you think the first question we're going to ask you is? Did you water it? Have you watered? And then people get really defensive, like, I water it every day. Yeah, but you're calling us, so maybe not. So water is hands down one of the biggest issues for successful gardens. It's so easy, we live busy lives, it's easy to get the garden planted. I'm really excited, I just went to the seminar, I'm going to get all these things in the soil, I'm going to get it all into the ground, and then tomorrow what do? Too busy, I didn't get out there, so you don't water it. And then all of a sudden a few days have gone by, and you're wondering, why aren't those vegetables looking as good? I swear I listened to Joey. But if you're not watering them regularly, they won't thrive. So this is part of that, creating the right condition for our vegetable gardens to thrive. So easy and convenient. And what I mean by convenient is how many of you, after work, before school, whatever you've got going on, are going to unroll a hose 100 feet across a yard to water your garden, and then roll it back up. right? Not all that convenient. So make sure wherever you pick that location for your garden, the water source is there and it's easy. If it needs to be watered, you can walk right out, turn it on, and water. Better yet, put in like an irrigation system. That's what we have. We've got 10 or 15 boxes and beds in our own garden, as well as fruit trees, and there's just no way we plant up all those beds and then stand out there with a hose each morning. So we've got them on some drip irrigation. That's also a great way to do it. But make sure that it's easy and convenient for you to water. As we talk about all these things that we need to do to create the right conditions for our plants, we always want to think about how can we make it easy and convenient so that we are successful. Next, the area. How many people are doing vegetables in like containers or raised beds of some sort? Kind of what we do in our garden. How many are just doing them right in the ground somewhere in your yard? Okay, not as many. So when you're in raised beds or containers, the pots or the beds are going to drain pretty well just by the nature of being raised. That's sort of one of the reasons that we do them that way. In the case of putting them in the ground, if you're picking a location for that garden, just make sure that it drains really well. We're not as wet usually through the winter and spring season, although we've had unusual rains throughout this winter and early spring here. But certainly once we get to the summertime, it's awfully soggy. And so you just want to make sure that the area drains well. After a thunderstorm, the next day, it should have pretty much drained off of water and not be particularly wet anymore. Standing water in a spot's not going to be good for your vegetable garden. So make sure it's a well-drained area when you're choosing that location. And lastly, a consideration for the location is make sure that it's convenient to harvest. How many people have ever watched kind of vegetables just fall off their plants and not eaten them? Oh, come on, raise your hands. We've all done it, right? If you garden, you garden. So just make sure that it's really easy to get to. It's really easy after work to go out and grab the vegetables off the plants and use them. I know that seems a little bit silly, but I've got our vegetable garden to where like you can kind of see it from the kitchen, and so it makes you feel really guilty when you're inside sprinkling a dried spice on it. You could have just gone and cut it right out from the garden. So make sure that you can easily harvest. That way you're more likely to use what you're growing. All right, so we've picked a good sunny location now that drains well for our veggie gardens. The next thing to create the conditions for these plants to thrive is to do, what do you think? We do need to fertilize, but we'll get to that in the care. Soil, I heard somebody say soil. So, good soil. You know, I got a PA system, and I thought, with a PA system, I'll be able to talk over everything. I guess not. Soil's going to be the next step. Good, rich soil. So how many people walk out into their backyard and have rich, black dirt just everywhere? Not a lot of us in Florida, right? A lot of us have sandy soil, which isn't terrible because it drains really well, but it does not hold any nutrients whatsoever up for the plants. So most of us don't have rich soil right out in our backyards. If you live in an old cow pasture or something like that, then you're just count yourself lucky that you've got rich soil. So we're usually going to have to amend that soil in some way. Because why are we growing vegetable gardens in the first place? A couple reasons, anybody? Does it taste good? We have fresh veggies, probably avoiding like chemicals and pesticides and things like that from the store. Sometimes just the feeling of doing it, right? To grow something yourself, show that kids where vegetables actually come from, that they come from a garden, not from the store, can be an important lesson in life too. But soil is the key for really healthy plants. We're not doing hydroponics or aeroponics here. There are other ways of growing plants, of course. Those tend to require a lot of extra inputs of fertilizers and things like that to keep the plants actually growing without soil. A good, actual, complete, rich soil means you wouldn't have to fertilize your plants at all. So if you actually built up a soil that had a good richness, a good amount of organic material, you wouldn't actually have to fertilize those plants at all. That's not usually happen for us, so we usually fertilize a little bit, but we want to start with a good rich soil mix to get us going. If it's the first time that you're doing your garden beds, of course you're going to have to put a little extra into it in terms of getting those beds filled the first time. In subsequent seasons and years, you usually just have to top dress a little bit. So when it comes to soil, how many answers do you think you would get for different soil mixes if you asked 100 gardeners what their favorite soil was? You get 100. So everyone you talk to is going to have a different way of doing it. And you guys, as you learn to garden in your own areas, you're going to develop what you like to do and what works for you. So I'm going to tell you what works for me, and then take it and modify it for what works well for you. So, of course, we're partial to our custom blended Kirby's planting soil. It's a good rich mix of organic material and it drains really well. So we start our beds with that. We cut in a little bit of topsoil just to add some density for the veggie beds. And then I like to top dress my raised beds with like a bag of black cow per like 4x8 raised bed. Mix that all together, turn it up a little bit, and you're ready to go. So that's kind of my mix that I usually go for. But there's lots of materials and types of soils that you can use. There's peat, there's cow manure of various sorts. Home compost, if you're doing that's a wonderful addition. When we did our vegetable garden this week, I went into the chicken coop, scooped out not fresh stuff, but just kind of in their yard where they run around and, well, do their business. Just scooped up all this just really, really black dirt and just turned that into our bed. So that was my way of a little home compost for the garden. So all of those materials are something that you could use. But you got to start somewhere, especially if you're doing a new bed. So if it's a raised bed or a container, you're probably going to use that mix and just put that into the raised bed. If you're using the ground, so if you're just doing the vegetables right into the ground, you probably add that soil in there and then till or mix it in down to about a foot or so just to kind of work that good rich soil into those new bed areas. As you're preparing the soil, whether it's a raised bed or just right into the ground, make sure you get rid of any big debris. Old mulch, sticks, leaves, rocks, and things like that. Our vegetable plants grow really fast, right? Tomatoes harvest in like 70 to 75 days. You know, with landscape plants in the yard, we wait years for them to grow, and they're a little bit stronger at pushing past some of that stuff in the soil. But for those veggie plants, we want them to grow quick and produce quickly. So we need to give them all the chance they have, and getting some of that big stuff out of the soil helps those roots develop a little bit better instead of having impediments underground. So we need a good rich soil to get them started. For container gardens, you can use that similar kind of mix, or we have some other cool soils. Down here is a really, really ultra-rich soil by Fox Farm called Ocean Forest. It's got like kelp, back guano, all sorts of really rich material that has good fertilizer and natural fertilizer in it. So that can be great for containers as well as another way for doing a container garden. Like I said, if you're doing the garden a second time, like for us this year, I think it was the third season on our vegetable garden in its particular orientation. And so with that, the beds had sunk down a little bit. You know, you lose a little bit. You take plants out, the roots disappear. So you had a little bit less soil. So we added a little bit more. Like I said, we moved some of the chicken manure, and then we just added it up to get it back to the top, returned it just a little bit, raked it nice and smooth, and then you're ready to go. In some cases with the soil, some people like to add fertilizers, or if you're having a soil acidity problem, you can add something like lime. That's a more complicated issue. I'm not going to talk about the specifics of that. But if you're adding anything chemical into your soil and turning it in, you do want to make sure you do that 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time before planting so that everything can kind of settle. Those things aren't usually necessary, so if you're ready to plant today, once you've turned the soil together, you can just plant. You don't need to wait a couple of weeks or anything like that. The winter, if you read our email newsletter, I try to push people in December and January to do that garden prep, like prep up the soil. That way it is ready ahead of time, and when it's planting day, you don't have to do the hard turning the soil work. You can just do the fun planting work. So clean it out, get the good rich soil in there. Very important. All those vitamins and antioxidants that people talk about for plants, it all comes from the soil. That's where they get those minerals and nutrients from. So we want that soil to be able to deliver it well to them. So then we picked our location now. We've got some good rich soil out there. So now we want to plan the garden. I think having a plan is a great idea. It's kind of the dream part of gardening to me, where you get to kind of dream of cabbages the size of your head and buckets of tomatoes that you just pick every other day and it doesn't stop. But there are a couple of considerations when you're planning out your garden. Of course, figure out what size you have to work with, and then plant accordingly. You don't want to overcrowd vegetable plants. That'll cause disease issues, cause more bug issues. So you don't want to overcrowd a vegetable garden. You want to space it as much as possible to what like the signs and tags say. If you're planting seeds, what like the seed packets say, so that they're spaced appropriately for all of the things that you're going to need to do to take care of them. Plant what you will use when you're planting the garden. I know I've talked to people before and they tell me they're planting okra, they're planting eggplant. It's like, oh, well, what recipes do you use? Oh, I don't really eat it. Well, why are you planting it then? Come on. Plant something that your family likes, that everyone will eat. Plant something you have some good recipes for. That way you have a plan with how you're going to use the harvests that you get. Again, I know those seem like silly considerations sometimes, but if you've got an idea of what you're going to do with it, sometimes I think it gets you more excited to get out there and take care of it and make sure that those peppers grow really well so that you can make chili rellenos, right? Plant varieties for success. So if it's your first time, ask other people what varieties of different vegetables they've had good luck with. If you've done it before, I like to use that old 80-20 rule. 80% stuff that you know has grown really well for you in the past, and 20% experiments. So it's always fun to kind of push the bounds on what you've grown or new vegetables or different things, but if you do too much of that, you end up not being successful, and it can be kind of frustrating. So make sure the bulk of your garden are things that either you've had great experiences with, or if you're new to it, other folks have had great experiences with, just to help you have good success. As you're planning out your garden, one consideration can also be the timing of how you plant. So sometimes we don't have a lot of time, we plant everything on one day, but it can be actually kind of nice to stagger plantings a little bit, especially for, say, broccoli, right? How many people can eat like 10 heads of broccoli in one day? One day? I think we're having a broccoli eating contest. But it would be nice for our broccoli maybe to stagger over a couple of weeks. So if you plant some now, and some in a week, and some in a week, you can kind of stagger the harvests of some of your vegetables. That way they're harvesting at a nice rhythm for you to use rather than having everything all at once. You can do that with seeds as well, like if you're seeding out lettuces or spinaches for salads, do a row this week, a row next week, and you can also get that nice rotation of the leafy things. And the last kind of point I would give you for planning the garden is just plan the orientation of the plants based on their heights. So corn, pole beans, different things, and even tomatoes can get really, really tall. Make sure they don't grow in such a way that they cast a shadow over everything else in your particular garden bed. So just think about that depending on whether your gardens are north, south, east, west, and then plant the tall to short stuff appropriately so that everything gets as much sun as it needs to really grow and to harvest as well as you really want it to. All right, so now if we've made our plan, we've kind of taken some of those things into consideration. We know exactly how many plants we need, what soil we need. So we're ready to fill up our carts with vegetables and get out and plant them. So now we got to do the planting. This is where we get to get our hands dirty, and it's kind of fun. So 2 ways to start most of our vegetable plants. One way is going to be from seeds. I love using seeds for particular vegetable varieties just because it seems more practical. So things like radishes, beets, and then I brought in arugula up here, but lettuces and spinaches and all those kinds of things really seem like they make more sense from seed packets, because you can plant a nice row of something. For other things with seeds, you can just find some cool varieties, heirloom and organic varieties that you might not find as vegetable starts. There's just a limit to what anyone can grow in terms of each variety that's out there of vegetable plant to have them in like the 4-packs or the gallon-sized pots. So you find some cool varieties as well in your seed packets. So when you're planting seeds, you can either sow them into small containers, something like these little 4-packs. I like to use old egg cartons as a really easy way to start seeds, and you can start those indoors if you like, or they can be outdoors in a nice sunny area. Then once they get to a nice size, and you transplant them into your garden. But for a lot of seedlings, I'm going to do some corn later with the earth box demo, but radishes and beets and lettuces and things like that, they're easy to just seed right out into the garden bed. You want to start with a nice fine soil. We've got like the seed and cutting mix here. It's not going to have any big chunks at all. It's really fine so that the seed roots can grow real easily into that soil. And the most important thing I would say for planting seeds is to plant them at the correct depth. So some seeds are really, really tiny, and some seeds are a little bit bigger, right? So radishes, lettuces, all real small seeds. Corn, beans, and things like that are going to be larger seeds. The general rule of thumb is going to be that large seeds want to be planted a little bit deeper, small seeds a little bit shallower. And you don't want to mix that up, because if a shallow seed is too deep, it won't have the energy to find its way above ground. If the big seed is too shallow, it won't have the strength to hold itself up when it does pop out of the ground. So if you've ever seeded beans or something like that, it came up really fast and then flopped over. That could be why they didn't have enough support underground to hold them up. They're a little bit larger. Even their stems will be larger than some of the others. And similarly, if you planted lettuces and spinaches in the ground and you never saw anything come up, It could be because they were too deep and they couldn't emerge. They just didn't have the energy from the seed itself to come up out of the ground. So each of the seed packets that we have is going to have a spacing, row spacing, and planting depth on it on the back, and just follow that as best as possible. That would be my single biggest piece of advice for planting seeds. If you're so the question was, do you plant one little seed at a time? Every single packet will have slightly different instructions. Some of them tell you to put 2 in a hole, then you thin them out after a couple of weeks. Sometimes you just seed it as a row. You can. I am guilty of never thinning our carrots. Carrot seeds are super, super tiny. They want you to put 2 in each hole and then thin them to 1. We just make rows and dump them out. And then we intend to thin them out at some point so the carrots will grow. And we never do. But we have got some really pretty carrots this year, so we seem to do okay. But it will have different directions for each one on the packets for those seeds. For the remainder of your vegetable plants, you're going to plant them similarly to the way you'd plant most landscape plants. Tiny little hole in the soil that you've made. Level is the way we're going to plant them with the existing soil. So we don't want to bury them deep or under for the majority of our vegetable plants, nice and level with the ground around it. Compact the soil in a little bit to support them without overdoing it. We do want a little airspace in that soil. We want well-drained soil so the water can move through. We don't want to compact it to the point where it won't. So just a nice press down so that they're held in well without being over-compacted. The only exception to that is tomato plants. Those you can dig a slightly deeper hole, plant them in a little bit deeper, and then you can put the soil up against the base. They'll actually root out a little bit into the soil, and it holds them up a little better over the long term. Tomato plants that are producing a lot are awfully heavy. So you're still going to have to stake them or cage them in some way to hold them up over time. But that at least gets them a strong root start, which we need for our veggie plants. All right. So now we've got our location picked, our soil is nice and rich, we've planned the garden, we've planted the garden. Now comes the fun part. Now we got to take care of the garden. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming, but we're going to talk about a lot of things here. And I think it's important to think about when you're going out to plant the garden, just keep in mind what you've got to do. How big a garden are you going to plant? Are you going to be able to water it appropriately? And just keep all of those things in mind as we go through the care list here. Again, it doesn't have to be overwhelming, but if you don't do it, your garden's not going to thrive. So we've got all the base conditions done. I'm sorry, that sounds weird. It sounded weird in my ears, so adjusting that a little. So what do you think the first thing I'm going to lecture you about is? Water. Yeah. It's not a landscaping seminar, so I'll only say water 25 times in this one instead of 50 in the landscaping seminar. Water is critically important. It's not just for plants, right? It's for people. Like we can live for, weeks without food, but days without water or something like that. It's important for us. It's very important for the plants as well. Just the same way water transports minerals and nutrients around our bodies, it does it in the system of the plant. Just in the same way that water cools us on hot days, it does the same thing for plants. It helps them regulate their temperature. So water is critically important for our plants. That's why we want that source of water to be easy and convenient to get to, because for the first month, how often do you think we're going to have to water our plants? Every single day. And at what time of day? Always in the morning. Always in the morning. Very critical that plants have the water available to them in the hot afternoon when the sun is out. When the sun is out is when plants are actively making food, actively transporting minerals and nutrients through their system. That's when they need that water. How many people have planted stuff and come home from work and seen it wilted and then watered it? And it perks back up a little bit, right? And you go to work the next day and you come home and what's wrong with your plants again? They're wilted again, right? And so you water them and they perk up just a little bit. And that's a cycle you get into of wilt and recover. And it doesn't seem like a big deal, and maybe for some of our landscape plants like viburnums and ligustrums, it doesn't matter that much. But for our veggies, we're trying to get these guys to produce in 70 days. We need them to produce quickly. They've got to be as strong as possible. That wilt recover cycle steals tons of energy from the plants and causes them not to grow, not to be able to flower as well, and just not be as strong a plant over the long term. So whenever someone comes in with an issue like that, we tell them switch that watering to the morning. So you water the plants really well in the morning. Guess what's going to happen when you come home from work? They're going to be standing strong because they had water on their roots during the day when they needed it. So what happens at night is you water at night, and they recover a little bit, but most of that water you put on the soil percolates through and beyond the root zone of the plants, especially for little tiny plants like these guys when they're starters. And so by the time the hot afternoon comes back the next day, there's no water available for that plant to take it up. And that's where that wilt and recover comes from. Switch your watering, so even with your lawns, switch your sprinklers to run in the morning as opposed to in the evening, and your lawns will do better. Every plant, every living plant kind of takes water up in a very similar way. And so the morning time is best. It doesn't have to be before the crack of dawn. It just needs to be before like the sun is really hot on the plant. So if you have to do it before work at 4 or 5, that's absolutely fine. But if you can do it 8, 9, 10, as long as it's before the hot sun is on the plants, that's absolutely fine. So water, water, water. We're going to water daily for the first month, every other day for the second month, about twice a week for the third month. That's our typical watering spiel that we give. For the vegetable garden, you're never really going to go below twice a week to me. A few sources say a mature vegetable garden can get 1 inch of water a week. I've never seen my plants thrive with just 1 inch. So twice a week's a good watering, I think, for most gardens once they've started to mature into that third month. But you've got to keep an eye on them. Sometimes in a hot summer, a tomato plant will just suck up all kinds of water because it's got lots of leaves and it's producing fruits that are full of water. So tons of fruits, each of the fruits and vegetables have lots of water in them. And so they need that in order to produce well. So follow that as kind of a guideline and then adapt it to your situation. And especially as we come into the warmer months, depending on how much rain we're getting and how hot it actually is, you might have to increase or decrease appropriately. But that's a good place to start. So water, water, water. And always when you water, make sure that you're watering deeply. So where do you think plants want the water to go? The roots. I didn't hear anybody say leaves, did I? On our way home, there was a place that had planted some palm trees, and every evening we saw the person standing out with a hose just spraying down the fronds, and it's all we could do to not stop and say, just water the ground. So the plants don't want the water on the leaves. It can encourage disease issues if there's too much water settling on the leaves. Not a big deal if you get a little spray on them, but that's not where they use the water. They use the water from their roots. So whenever you're doing your watering, make sure that water is going right onto the roots of the plant. And each watering that you do should be a nice deep soaking. How many people have had an oak tree bust up their sidewalk or driveway or something like that before, or had a neighbor that has done it, right? We all hear about those big trees that do that. The only reason they do that is because at some point in their life they were poorly watered. And they have a whole lot of surface roots because that's the only place that water was available to them. So even if you took one of our trees now and put it right next to your sidewalk and watered it consistently and deeply, you would drive all those new roots down. So your watering would drive them down. Then they find their own water and they stay down. And you would almost never see those roots at the surface. But when you plant a new tree or even your vegetable garden, and all it gets is a light dusting of water over the surface, and this happens with big trees when they get watered with lawn sprinklers, there's only water in that top foot of soil for the tree. So you got 2 feet of roots that are just bone dry. And those roots kind of die away, and the roots on the top stick around. Now all of a sudden you've got a huge root system holding a grandfather oak tree up in that top foot, 2 feet of soil, and each year the roots swell. It's the same way that rings are formed in the trunk of a tree. The roots get a little bit bigger each year, and eventually they sort of come to the surface when their size gets large enough and start breaking sidewalks and driveways. So it's not the tree's fault. That is the moral of that story. But true for our vegetables as well. They're very, very small plants, especially if you start with like a little 4-pack. So they don't need a ton of water when they're new, but you still want water that gets through the roots and beyond the root system to encourage those roots to grow. The plant's going to grow roots where it finds water. So, root starts to grow, if there's water, it's going to grow a little more. Finds more water, it's going to grow a little more, and it'll continue that process. It's probably an oversimplification, but it will continue to grow a deep root system. So get in the habit of watering deeply. Lots of water getting down through the soil. Generally, an inch of water will make its way about a foot in most average Florida soils. And so an inch of water is good for most of your veggie gardens because they're not much deeper than that. If your beds are deeper, if you've dug the soil a little bit deeper, just a little more water at each watering time to make sure that you're encouraging those roots to grow nice and deep. Whether it's landscape plants, shade trees, or vegetable gardens, stronger roots means stronger plants. They can get more nutrients. They can produce more flowers, fruits, and harvests. So make sure that you're doing that watering well each time, and your plants will be a lot happier with you in the long run. me take a quick drink of water. So I'll answer your question and then your question, and then I'm going to hold any questions to the end just because there are an awful lot of people here. So I will answer questions even if it means missing lunch. But your question was, is there a way to translate into gallons? I am sure we could do some geometric math to kind of figure it out. But it's really not about how many gallons of water. I mean, for plants like this, a half gallon, if you needed a number, would probably be enough to start them, and then you kind of move it up to about a gallon, just to make sure that plenty of water was getting through that area. Oh, that's a good question. How do you know when they have enough? The great thing about like a raised bed or garden outside is that it's difficult to overwater them. So as long as you're thinking about an inch's worth of water, just make sure that you get that on there and then let them go for the day. And then they're going to tell you late in the day how they're doing. So if you've watered and you see them wilting later in the day, the next time you water, just increase the time that you maybe put the hose on each one a little bit. So there's no way to tell exactly like when to stop, but the best way to do is kind of know how long you watered and then just watch the plants, especially when the hot sun's out on them, and they'll tell you if they've had enough or not. All right, so we got to continue on caring for plants. That's enough about watering, right? So that plants don't only need water, they also need some fertilizer. So they need some nutrients as well. And we'll give that to them in the form of fertilizer. Now hopefully we've started with a good rich soil that's got organic material in there so that it's delivering a lot of natural nutrients to the plant. That's one of the best ways for them to get it. But you know, a lot of us are impatient, we want maximum harvest, so we're going to do a little extra fertilizing to keep them going. Two ways primarily to fertilize. One's going to be a liquid fertilizer. Mix it up in like a hose end sprayer, spray bottle or something like that. You can spray out on the leaves and on the soil. That'll be kind of your typical Miracle-Gro type soil, or one of our newer favorites is a Fox Farm Grow Big. There's also a Tiger Bloom for when it's bloom time. But those are two really rich mix. I guess this is another one where there's earthworm castings and things like that in it. So nice natural material for getting nutrients into all of your vegetable plants. And then the other way to fertilize is through a granular fertilizer. If you like going organic, one of my favorites is the Garden Tone fertilizer by Espoma. That one's grown really great plants for me. With granulars, you only need to use them once per month. And I don't have our new packaging over here, but our Kirby's Special fertilizer is also a really great way. It's our Kirby's 848 fertilizer that's good for absolutely everything. It's a complete fertilizer, so it's got all the major and minor elements in it. That if you don't really care about organic specifically, it's just a conventional fertilizer that also boosts them with nice nutrients. And you do it about once per month on your plants, starting at kind of 30 days in. So you don't want to fertilize new plants right away. Give them a few weeks and then start it up. If you're going to do a liquid fertilizer, just make sure that the plants have kind of gotten established a week or two, and then start the liquid fertilizer on them. With really young plants, I hate to do too much. You don't want to burn them or anything like that. Water's the most important thing to get them started when they're brand new and young. So fertilize regularly, and the plants will grow better and produce more for you over time. For your garden beds, we also want to mulch them typically in some way. Any kind of wood mulch is fine, as long as you're not putting big chunks of stuff back into the soil that you just have to clean out the next time around. But pine straw, pine bark, but cypress mulch, anything like that without dyes or chemicals, no weed and feed weird mulches or anything like that, it would be fine. Grass clippings, anything like that would be fine as well. Basically, the mulch layer is going to help hold moisture in the soil, and it's going to keep the weeds down a little bit in the area. So, two reasons to use mulch. Not an absolute necessity, but it can kind of help you out on your watering schedule as well as on your weeding schedule. Make sure at each season you kind of clean out that old mulch. Again, you don't want it working its way into the soil and having big chunks of pine bark and cypress mulch in the soil where the vegetables' roots are going to be growing. So, what do you think happens in beds, garden beds, where we fertilize and water a lot? Weeds grow. Because weeds will grow where we're not watering and not fertilizing, right? And they're especially going to grow well in areas where we are fertilizing and are watering. So just keep an eye out for the weeds. Don't let them get so big that they steal a lot of nutrient away from your vegetable plants. If they've gotten that big, you're probably not taking care of your vegetable garden properly. But one of the ways I like to take care of weeds is with a little hand cultivator and old potato rake. Just go through when the weeds are really small and knock them down. And just kind of turn them back into the soil. They'll decompose and just become part of the soil with some more rich organic material. And it's a pretty easy way to do it without letting them get too big. It also aerates the roots a little bit. So that does not gel well with mulching. So I actually don't tend to mulch all of my beds just because I like to be able to kick the weeds down with the cultivator pretty easily. If they get too big, just make sure you are pulling those weeds that you find, because they will steal nutrients really quickly from your vegetable plants. And then the last thing that we like to do to take care of our gardens is called scouting. This is best done in the morning with the hot beverage of your choice in your hands, and it's a perfect time to just walk around the garden and enjoy it. But while you're enjoying the garden, keep an eye out for pests. We're going to look for disease issues, which could show up as spots on the leaves. We're going to look for pest issues, which we obviously might see as chew marks or twisted up leaves, curled leaves, and things like that. But doing scouting on a regular basis is a great way to make sure that we're keeping up with any problems in our gardens. There's nothing worse here at the nursery. A customer brings a piece of a pepper plant and it's just covered with aphids, because our solution is just going to be tough. It's like, it's so bad at this point that it may be hard to cure it and then get the plants into good health to keep going for a harvest. So the earlier you catch bug, insect, and disease issues, the better off you'll be able to treat and just get rid of the problem and keep your vegetable garden growing without any problem. So check up on it on a regular basis. A couple of times a week, peek out on the different beds and make sure that everything's growing well, that there aren't any issues going on. Because it's Florida, there are going to be issues. There's bugs and fungus everywhere. Pretty unavoidable generally, and especially in the spring garden. I always say at the fall gardening seminar that it's one of the easier gardens where spraying is not quite as necessary. In the spring garden, especially as we move into the hot, humid season of like late March and April, it can get to a point where spraying something is necessary. So our go-to sprays for insect and disease, one of our favorites is neem oil, derived from the neem tree. So it's kind of natural, it's organic, it won't be harmful to anybody. We've got it as a ready-to-use spray and as a concentrate. You can spray something like that up to once a week. I probably wouldn't do it too much more than that. And you can do it preventatively. Like if you had a garden last year and you had some bug issues or aphid issues, go ahead and do it preventatively. Once the plants are a couple of weeks old, you can start spraying them once a week. And it'll also prevent any new insect issues from coming in and taking over your crops. Another one that we like to use is Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew, RBT. And it's a really good for killing a variety of bugs, but caterpillars and things like that as well, which can plague some of our squashes, cabbages, and things like that. So those are two of our favorite sprays. One I didn't bring over is just called Caterpillar Killer, and it has Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a bacteria in it. That's really, really good for crawling insects. So especially good for treating any of the cabbage family plants when they have the cabbage loppers or worms on some of the squashes and things like that. So that's another one that we'll use. If you ever have a problem that you can't identify, you can always email it to us, come into the nursery with a leaf, and we'll help you find the right product for treating the particular issue that you have at that time. Always spray in the evening. So that's really, really important, especially when we're talking about neem oil. It is an oil. So what happens to our bodies when we rub baby oil all over and lay out in the afternoon? We burn, right? And so plants, that can happen to them as well. So sprays that are left on the plant in the hot afternoon sun, or that are brand new in the hot afternoon sun, can cause them to burn. So spray in the evening. By the next day it will have dried, and it won't be a problem for the plants. You won't burn them. So spray in the evening, and then never ever spray when what is active? Bees. So a bunch of people raised their hands saying they had trouble with cucumbers. And one of the issues with cucumbers and a lot of plants in the squash family is that they absolutely need bees to pollinate them. So peppers and tomatoes and other things like that have very small flowers, and wind pollinates them really well. Pollen moves from one flower to the other pretty easily via the wind because the flowers are kind of small and open. But squash flowers are a little more trumpet shaped. And so that's a big curveball for the wind to fling pollen out and then back in. And so we require bees a lot more for those types of plants. And so if you need to spray something preventatively on a regular basis, just make sure that if you get out there and there's bees active, don't spray. Usually by the evening and late evening, most of the bees have kind of gone back to their hives and are not active. But if you happen to see them out there, just skip that night. The bees are going to be much more helpful to your garden than the getting a few aphids out of there. As far as bees go, so I mentioned that they're really important for a lot of those squash family plants, but one of the ways that we can attract bees to our garden is what we like to call companion planting. And so I brought a couple of flowers over here to show you. On the right here is a heather, and it's a plant that's been around a long time, but here in the nursery when it kind of gets into bee season, they're almost always covered with bees. So it's a great plant to have nearby. It doesn't have to be right in the vegetable garden, but as long as it's nearby so that it attracts some bees. This one over here is called Angelonia or summer snapdragon, and it's another one that'll often be loaded with bees kind of as we get into that season as well. Lots of other plants that attract bees, powder puffs and bottle brushes. So there's lots of different, different kinds of salvia are really good for the bees as well. So those can be great. And again, they don't have to be right in the vegetable garden, but make them a part of your garden somewhere so that they'll attract bees and those will come into our area. All right, let's see. I think that is it for the basics of the seminar. I think I've given you all a lot to think about, hopefully. Some great tips and tricks for getting great harvests out of your vegetable gardens. I'm going to do an earth box planting demo, but my voice needs a few minutes to rest. And so what I'll do is I will take questions for, let's say, about 5 minutes or so. I see your hand. I'll get you in a minute. And I'll take about 5 minutes of questions, and then I'll stop and I'll do the earth box demo. And please feel free to stay if you want to take a look at that. My girls are going to help me plant it up. And so thank you very much for coming out to the vegetable seminar. Our veggie section is just outside the corner of the greenhouse. Lots of 4-pack vegetables. I think we have most of the varieties of things that we'll have for the season. We might be missing okra just yet. Oh, we might be missing a few cucumbers or something like that. Herb section is over in that area as well, and we started something new this year called Kirby's Culinary Corner. It is you can get to it online, and we're kind of sharing a weekly recipe with you, and we're featuring a particular herb. This month was rosemary, hence the rosemary lemonade. But there's some other rosemary recipes on there, but you can follow that on both social media, and you'll see it in the newsletter and different things for some fun recipes that you can also use for your garden. So thanks very much for coming, and I'm going to take a sip of water, and then I'm going to start with the gentleman in the back and his question. You're going to have to speak up for me to hear it though, okay? So give me a minute to take a sip of water. And I will not be offended if you get up and walk around. Okay, can I take a sip of water first, and then I'm going to give you my full attention. Hey Abby, can you stop the video camera, please? Yes, sir. What you got?
I can't reach it.
Which button?
It's the red button. The red one.
I don't see a red button.
Does it say stand by?
I don't know what I pushed.
We've been lifting
Yeah, we want bees a lot more than we want flowers.
Here, let me hold it.
But yeah, there's lots of different flowers that attract